Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met.
They're coming home soon. Yes, yes. And the job is done, and they did a good job, and it's over. It's fabulous.
Can't wait to get home. I'm not going to lie.
This is the CBS Morning News for Thursday, February 28th. Good morning. I'm Jacqueline Adams.
And I'm Charles Osgood, and here are the headlines. Iraq, humiliated on the battlefield, joins the Allied ceasefire and agrees to all UN resolutions. U.S. losses in the fighting total fewer than 100 dead. Iraqi casualties are estimated at more than 85,000. And liberated Kuwait begins the long, tough job of rebuilding.
An Iraqi military spokesman went on Baghdad radio this morning to announce that Iraqi troops had been ordered to stop fighting. Iraq also informed the United Nations it now accepts all the Security Council resolutions relating to the invasion of Kuwait. This about 3 hours after U.S. and Allied forces broke off the attack and took up defensive positions as ordered by President Bush. With more on the ceasefire in the field, Martha Teichner is standing by in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. Good morning, Martha.
Good morning, Jackie. The ceasefire appears to be holding, even though, according to military sources in Riyadh this morning, the fighting continued right up until the last moment. The remnants of 3 different operations, which were the tank battles going on west of Basra.
By the end, 41 out of Iraq's 42 divisions were destroyed or rendered ineffective. The picture is of total disarray. What's left is wreckage scattered across the theater of operations. Allied forces control all of the escape routes. Troops from the U.S. 101st Airborne were shuttled by helicopter into positions north and west of the main fighting in order to plug the holes. But Iraqi troops will be allowed to retreat with their weapons, according to a military source. The gate is open, he said, but there's not going to be much going through that gate. The traffic north toward Baghdad is likely to be lighter than the traffic south toward POW camps. There are now at least 80,000 of them. The number of Iraqi casualties is only now beginning to emerge. Even by Iraq's own admission, its dead and wounded surpassed the number of POWs. The actual number could be much higher, although U.S. military sources have consistently avoided a body count. At last night's military briefing, General Schwarzkopf asked where the unaccounted for Iraqi troops have gone, acknowledged a very high number of them had been killed.
The flip side of the staggering Iraqi casualties is what General Schwarzkopf last night called a miracle, the incredibly light Allied casualties. At the time of the ceasefire, only 79 Americans had died. Only 213 Americans had been wounded. Jackie?
Thank you very much, Martha Teichner in Dhahran. Charlie?
After 7 months under the Iraqi heel, the people of Kuwait are relishing freedom this morning. But they also face the monumental task of rebuilding a shattered country. Bob McEwen is in Kuwait City. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Charlie. As you say, after 7 months of occupation and devastation, strangers in their own land, the people of Kuwait are back out in the streets this morning, and with a vengeance. The news of the ceasefire came early here today, and it set off another round of gunfire and flag waving and unbridled enthusiasm for the USA and for other members of the coalition, which have rid them of Saddam Hussein and Iraq. I think over the past couple of days we've seen a growing confidence that this really is over. Yesterday there seemed to be a lingering doubt. Today there was far, far less. But even all of this celebration has not been able to entirely overcome the memories of what has taken place here over the past 7 months.
It's beyond imagination what these people did. And it's like you never expected it from a neighbor who we've helped over the years to have such hatred towards us. Why? I mean, we've given him everything.
It's like hell, and we don't know hell, but this, we wish nobody will be in this situation again. We haven't seen so bad as enemy, as army, thieves, to come and invade the country.
You know, Charlie, in a sense, we've seen people go from hiding in their homes when we arrived 2 days ago to a sense yesterday that peace was at hand, though some people still came up to us, even when the roads were thronged with people celebrating. Some people still came and said, have they really gone? Is it really safe? Well, today they know it's safe. They know that peace is at hand. There are problems, as you said earlier. The economy obviously has to be rebuilt at a staggering cost. The infrastructure is in ruins. The Emir is not expected to return to Kuwait for another 3 months. There's a period of military law which is probably going to be quite unpopular after all they've been through recently. Today, as you can tell by the tumult behind me, none of that really matters. It is peace again in Kuwait.
Bob, as you stand there, it is just a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, about 5 minutes after 2. Why is it so dark?
Well, I wish I could tell you that the sun came up on the first day of peace here in Kuwait, as it did yesterday on the day of liberation. The fact of the matter is that I suppose it'd be cloudy anyway. It's impossible to tell these days, though, because of the pall of smoke from all of the oil wells outside Kuwait City, which are still burning. Even if it were sunny, it likely wouldn't be a whole lot brighter than this.
Bob, how about those thousands? Some have said that it might be in the area of 40,000 Kuwaitis who were kidnapped or taken from Kuwait by the Iraqis as they left. What is the last word about them?
Well, the last word is that they were taken within the 2 or 3 days before the Iraqis left on Monday night, and frankly, no one seems to know where they are. Now, it was always assumed that they were in Iraqi control and that they might be in Iraq itself and that they could possibly be used as a bargaining chip in negotiations by Saddam Hussein. We just have no way of knowing. But underlying all of the joy that has been here over the past 24 hours, there is the certainty that there are a great many people who will not return to Kuwait when this is all over.
Is there any more information about these terrible atrocity stories that we had been hearing? There's been some question as to whether all of those were authentic, whether they really happened, or whether they were as bad as had been reported at first.
Well, it's impossible for us to know exactly, of course, but there's no doubt that there was a great deal that took place here that was awful during the time of the Iraqi occupation. Everyone has a story. It's not a story here and a story there. Everyone tells stories, and these are people who have seen things, seen the bodies, seen the carnage. We spoke yesterday to a captured Iraqi artillery captain who's in custody along with 14 of his men, and he openly admitted that these atrocities had taken place. He blamed it on Iraqi security and Saddam Hussein. They set the tone, he said. They were a cruel bunch, and cruelty was the watchword of the occupation here. His soldiers did it, he admitted, but he blamed it at the men on the top. Just a point that fascinated me. When we saw these Iraqi prisoners of war yesterday, it was a forlorn-looking group. There were about 13 or 14 of them. One was 17 years old, and one man was 75 years old.
I guess we should point out, Bob, or maybe you can clarify it for us, that gunfire that we're hearing is not gunfire in anger.
No, it's the first morning, actually, in the past 7 months that gunfire at dawn wasn't a reason for people to put their heads down and stick pretty close to home. This morning, when you heard the fire, you knew that it was good news.
Thank you very much. Bob McEwen in Kuwait City. Jackie?
Now let's get the view from Washington. Randall Pinkston is standing by at the White House. Good morning, Randall.
Good morning, Jacqueline. If Iraq holds to its promised ceasefire, which was announced early this morning, it will be meeting one of the key conditions laid down by President Bush last night when he ordered U.S. and coalition forces to suspend combat operations. In his speech to the nation, Mr. Bush said his order would remain in force as long as Iraq doesn't fire at any coalition forces and as long as Iraq does not launch any Scud missiles against any other nations. The president's decision came yesterday afternoon, a short time following the briefing in Riyadh by Allied Commander General Norman Schwarzkopf, a riveting briefing in which he spelled out exactly how the Allied forces had defeated the Iraqis on the battlefield. In the Oval Office, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Colin Powell told the president that it was even better than Schwarzkopf had indicated. After meeting with his war council, Mr. Bush decided to tell the nation that the military objectives had been achieved, that Kuwait was liberated, and peace is at hand.
7 months ago, America and the world drew a line in the sand. We declared that the aggression against Kuwait would not stand. And tonight, America and the world have kept their word.
To make the ceasefire permanent, President Bush, on behalf of the coalition, said Iraq must meet the following conditions: the release of all prisoners of war, Kuwaiti detainees, third country nationals, and the return of the remains of the fallen. Inform Kuwait of the location and nature of all land and sea mines. Comply with all relevant United Nations resolutions. Representatives of Iraq's military command must meet with their coalition counterparts within 48 hours to work out military aspects of the ceasefire. President Bush said Secretary of State Baker will be asking the United Nations Security Council to make arrangements for a formal conclusion of the war. Mr. Bush said there will be no solely American answer to the problems faced by Kuwait in the Gulf, but he said that the U.S. stands ready to assist all of the Gulf nations in the post-war period.
This war is now behind us. Ahead of us is the difficult task of securing a potentially historic peace. Tonight, though, let us be proud of what we have accomplished. Let us give thanks to those who risked their lives. Let us never forget those who gave their lives.
The President will be sending Secretary of State Baker to the Gulf next week to confer with the Arab coalition as he continues to confer with all of the members of the coalition of allied nations that achieved this spectacular victory. Jacqueline?
Randall, we don't have a lot of time, but I'm just wondering, what about the fate of Saddam Hussein? The president had all but been calling for a coup d'etat in Iraq. Is Saddam going to be allowed to remain in power?
If Saddam does remain in power, the people of Iraq will probably find it very difficult. The sanctions will be kept in place. Of course, the U.S. would be very interested in making sure that they are not rearmed. At this point, however, the administration is saying they assumed all along that Saddam Hussein would remain in power. And you might note that in his list of conditions last night, the president dropped the one that Saddam Hussein must publicly and personally make a statement. That humiliation factor has been dropped out as we look now towards formal peace.
Thank you very much. Randall Pinkston at the White House. The CBS Morning News continues. Still ahead, Susan Spencer on how the war was won.
And Eric Engberg reveals how troops of the 101st Airborne wound up strolling through the heart of Iraq.
Still on fire.
Much of the success of Operation Desert Storm can be traced to speed and surprise. As Eric Engberg reports, the 101st Airborne provided plenty of both.
The American attack on the Iraqis caught them by surprise, General Schwarzkopf said, in part because it started well west of where the Iraqis thought the Americans were. And the attack also went deep into Iraqi territory very quickly. These pictures, just back from the 101st Airborne Division, show that unit on the banks of the Euphrates River, blocking a highway, and also blocking any retreat by the Iraqi army. The 101st got to the Euphrates by helicopter, 3,000 troops moving at once. They moved around once they got there, as foot soldiers have always moved, leaning under the weight of heavy packs. There were burned-out vehicles along the roads, testifying to the force of the American artillery and bombing campaign. The soldiers of the 101st were within 100 miles of Baghdad, and General Schwarzkopf said they could have taken that capital if so ordered. The Iraqi civilians were mainly shepherds and farmers who seemed confused about why all these armed foreigners were walking around. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Saudi Arabia.
After routing the Iraqi military, General Norman Schwarzkopf and his coalition forces still have a lot of work to do. Susan Spencer has more on the aftermath of Operation Desert Storm.
General Schwarzkopf's hour-long tour de force press conference laid out a military success based on an aggressive air campaign, deceptive ground and sea moves, and an enemy whose soldiers often showed little will to fight.
They had a leadership that was so uncaring for them, okay, that they didn't properly feed them, they didn't properly give them water, and in the end, they kept them there only at the point of a gun.
The ground war has left U.S. soldiers strung over a wide expanse of Iraq. How they leave, when they leave, and how many stay is among the looming unanswered questions. Some of that may be determined by sheer logistics. Military base camps are stocked with supplies for 60 days for 500,000 people. Also unclear this morning of ceasefire, the number and disposition of prisoners of war. Military sources put the latest estimate at 80,000, but they warn that that's probably vastly underestimated. And then there is the situation in Kuwait. How many of the people said to have been rounded up are now Iraqi hostages? Where are they? And how will those responsible for what General Schwarzkopf called unspeakable atrocities ever be brought to justice?
They're not a part of the same human race. the people that did that the rest of us are. I've got to pray that that's the case.
Finally, there is the still touchy issue of Iraqi casualties. General Schwarzkopf has said there were a lot of people killed. But given the intensity and pace of this war, it's quite possible that that number, whether thousands or tens of thousands or more, may never accurately be known. Susan Spencer, CBS News, Riyadh.
Still ahead on the CBS Morning News, we'll have some thoughts on young Americans and how they performed under fire in the Gulf. On the CBS Morning News, here's a look at today's weather.
The Des Moines area forecast for today, some fog this morning, but mostly sunny later with a high of 57. Tonight, partly cloudy with a low of 40 degrees. For Friday, a 60% chance for rain and a high of 55. Currently in Des Moines, fog and 26 degrees.
Military families on the home front may have had their first restful night in weeks. Mike Walcher of WCCO-TV in Minneapolis was with one family support group last night when the president announced the good news.
These 50 or so people say they've endured the longest and most emotionally draining 6 weeks of their lives. They waited on edge tonight to hear the president's key words.
All United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations.
I was scared.
Be scared?
Out of my mind.
He's going to walk to the door. He's going to walk in the door. He's going to say, "Hi, Dad, I'm home."
These people have relied on their fellow SOCM members to keep their hopes from becoming too high, their despair too deep. They've counted on each other to handle the stress of weeks and months that seem unending.
Probably 100 years. I don't know. It just seems like it's been going on forever. My son has been over there since August, and it just seems like it's, I don't know, just forever, I guess.
We got letters from Sean since it's been the 24th of December when I talked to him on CCO radio. That's the last I'd heard until today. So it had to be a good day all around.
These relatives of Desert Storm troops say the war won't be over for them until their loved ones actually walk in the front door. I'm Mike Walcher for CBS News, Maple Grove, Minnesota.
A thought for this morning. As President Bush pointed out last night, this is not a time for euphoria or for gloating. But America does have reason to feel good about a lot of things right now. We don't want to run the risk of breaking our arms while patting ourselves on the back, but victory is sweet, no question about it. There's one aspect of this in particular that I'd like to call your attention to this morning. In the post-Vietnam era, America's young people have taken an awful lot of flack. There was supposed to be something terribly wrong with our kids. They weren't committed. They weren't dedicated. It was said time and again that they were too selfish to care about other people, too lazy to work hard and apply themselves at school. It was said that they'd never be able to compete successfully in this modern world because they'd been ruined by everything from drugs and sex to rock music and watching too much television. But look what just happened. 500,000 young Americans were asked to carry out a most difficult and dangerous mission. They were well-motivated, well-trained, well-led, and they didn't let us down. They accepted the discipline and showed us that they had the patience, the skill, the courage, and the spirit to get the job done. Among the things we have to celebrate and take pride in this morning are America's young people. They showed us something.
Saddam Hussein's conquest of Kuwait, the Allied siege of Iraq, a 6-week air war, and finally a crushing defeat for Hussein and his army. It all happened in just 7 months. Bob Schieffer takes us step-by-step through the crisis and the war.
August 3rd, the day after Iraq invades Kuwait, the UN Security Council demands withdrawal, the first of 12 resolutions aimed at Iraq. Later that month, President Bush orders reservists called up to support the forces in the Gulf. And just a day later, chilling pictures of Saddam Hussein trying to look friendly with obviously terrified young hostages, Westerners trapped in Iraq. It is not until mid-December that all Westerners are finally allowed to go home. November 29th, the Security Council gives Saddam a deadline. Be out by January 15th or face a possible attack by the U.S.-led coalition. As the new year begins, a flicker of hope. Secretary of State Baker meets Iraq's foreign minister in Geneva. 6.5 hours of talks go nowhere.
Senators voting in the affirmative.
3 days later, on a Saturday, Congress gives the president the authority he wants to go to war.
Good morning, Mr. Hussein. It's time for your 0530 reveille.
By midweek, just 1 day past the deadline, it is war, a devastating air attack by the coalition. The first casualty, Lieutenant Commander Michael Spiker, a Navy pilot. Saddam parades other flyers who've been captured and threatens to use them as human shields. January 30th, the Battle of Khafji. Fierce fighting for an abandoned Saudi town brings a preview of the ground war to come. 2 weeks later, Iraq claims Allied bombers have hit an air raid shelter, killing many civilians. The Allies say it was a military bunker. February 18th, Soviet President Gorbachev and Iraqi Foreign Minister Aziz propose a peace plan, but it falls far short of the UN demands. The Allies reject it. The ground war seems inevitable, and it comes, as sudden and violent as American commanders have promised. It is a rout. Just days later, Allied troops arrive in Kuwait City, as Iraq's army faces potential obliteration.
Let us give thanks to those who risked their lives. Let us never forget those who gave their lives. May God bless our valiant military forces and their families, and let us all remember them in our prayers. Good night, and may God bless the United States of America.
And that's the CBS Morning News for Thursday, February the 28th. I'm Charles Osgood.
And I'm Jacqueline Adams. Stay tuned at the top of the hour for CBS This Morning with Harry Smith in Saudi Arabia and Paula Zahn here in New York. Have a good day.